I invite you to bow your heads as I pray. Heavenly Father, we ask you to come into our presence this afternoon as we remember our friend Marilyn. She was your daughter, a loved mother and a grandmother and best friend to guests in this room this afternoon. You have promised that her death is just like a sleep. One day, hopefully in the near future, you will say, Marilyn, wake up, and she will awaken from her sleep and look into your bright and glorious face. And you will tell her that you have prepared a wonderful new home especially for her, because she had been a good and faithful servant in all things and counselor to many. Thank you for your love and care, Lord. Amen.
Thank you so much for coming to the Maryland service this afternoon. We appreciate that. The greatest tribute you can give to her is being right here, and I appreciate, and the family appreciates that gift. You are invited to stay at the after the service at a meal upstairs in the fellowship hall, and this would be a wonderful time to, if you didn't get a chance to share a story about Marilyn here in the service, you could share it across the table from a family member afterwards. At this time, our program will continue without interruption.
I'd like to invite you to sing together a song of faith and hope. Hope in Jesus' saving cross, his sustaining presence, and his glorious second coming and resurrection day. That's right on the back of your program. My hope is built on nothing less.
Hope is built on nothing less
than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness seems to veil his face, I rest in his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. His oath, his covenant and blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, he then is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, glad in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other
scripture reading chosen is from the English Standard Version in Hebrews 12. English Standard Version, Hebrews 12, verse 1 to 4. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, who endured sinners such hostility against himself, so that you and I may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Amen.
Marilyn Jean Sturtevant was born in Seattle, Washington on June 9, 1933, the first child of Kenneth and Evelyn Sturtevant. Marilyn lived in Friday Harbor until she was 3, when the family moved briefly to Bellingham and then to Puyallup. Her sister Sylvia was born in 1936 and her brother Richard in 1938, each on Christmas Day. Since Marilyn always received presents for Christmas on their birthday, her brother and sister each received one present on her birthday in June. She was never certain this was quite right. Her childhood was spent in Puyallup. Marilyn was always independent. She recalled a lot of freedom as a child. Her mother would give her instructions and a little money, and Marilyn would walk to the market, tell the butcher what cut of meat her mother wanted, pick up the other items, pay for them, and return home, all at the age of 5. She was not frightened, and thus began a life of curiosity and adventure. Her father was drafted into the Army when Marilyn was 9 and stationed in Casper, Wyoming, Kearney, Nebraska, San Antonio, Texas, Wendover Field, Utah, March Field, and Army Air Force units in Ontario and Daggett, California. Evelyn wanted to be with her husband, so the family followed as often as practical. This meant loading up the green Chrysler with everything needed to set up housekeeping. The trunk was filled, the back seat floor packed even to the seat level. Marilyn, Sylvia, and Richard had to sit with their legs out straight. Her mother, grandmother, and great-aunt Ruth occupied the front seat. Grandma and great-aunt Ruth were dropped off with other relatives in Denver, and the rest continued on to Nebraska. There they lived in 2 academy dorm rooms for 6 weeks, then in a 1-room, dilapidated motel in San Antonio with 2 double beds and a cot for Richard, an open burner gas stove, and an icebox. They moved many times during the war, same packing arrangement, same grandma and great-aunt in the front seat, dropped off with other relatives, sometimes back home to Puyallup if there was no acceptable place to live. They lived in Daggett, California from the time Marilyn was 11 till almost 13, when the whole family moved home to Puyallup. This was before air conditioning, and Marilyn remembers the Army bases and airfields as very hot, and the long-distance drives with the window open only a little, so her mother's hair would not blow out of place. Even so, Marilyn enjoyed these adventures as an opportunity to see new parts of the country. In the summer of 1947, when Marilyn was 14, she and her family went to Banff and Lake Louise. She recently related this story to Sylvia. While at the luxurious Banff Springs Hotel, my brother Richard, who was 8, climbed up the fire ladder. Those of us in the family have heard this story how many times? Climbed up the fire ladder onto that steep slate roof. My mother told my sister and I to find our father. It was nearly time to go to dinner. My sister and I found my father at the bottom of the ladder, his large frame blocking our view, and without turning around told us firmly to go back inside to Mother. Meanwhile, he was coaxing Richard back off the roof and down the ladder stairs. Richard was properly dressed for dinner in a jacket, white shirt, tie, and shorts with leather shoes. Ultimately, he descended to safety. They also saw the Calgary Stampede, which she and Richard and Sylvia found much more exciting than the luxurious Banff Springs Hotel and the beautiful mountain scenery. After her first year of college, the family took the train to Chicago, then to Michigan to purchase a new car. While her father took 2 weeks of surgery training, Marilyn and the rest of the family drove to Tennessee, passing through beautiful green pastures, then on to Monticello, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., where they explored the Smithsonian Museum. Marilyn savored knowledge from a very young age. She and her siblings checked out books from the library every week, always the maximum number that were allowed. And they ensured that each had books that none of the others had read yet, so they would have 3 times as many books to read that week. Education was valued and expected in the Sturdivant family. Her grandparents on her mother's side, her grandparents on her mother's side, went to college. Each went to college in the late 1800s, a rare accomplishment, especially for women. Marilyn attended public schools in Puyallup through 9th grade, then to Auburn Adventist Academy. Marilyn was an accomplished pianist, often accompanying classmates in academy and college. She never felt that she played that well because her brother Richard and sister both played better, she thought, but she was very talented herself. She had an extensive vocabulary cultivated while at the academy. She and several friends would meet in the library each morning, and pick out a word from the dictionary that none of them knew. By using these new words all day as they met around campus, she fixed them in her memory. In grade school, my friends used to marvel. What did your mom say? I can't understand her. Can you interpret? After moving in with us on April 5, she used a word in a sentence at dinner that I didn't know. It wasn't that unusual. I looked it up, and she had, of course, used picayune correctly. You can look it up if it's not one you know. Marilyn graduated from Walla Walla College in 1955 with a degree in home economics and got her first teaching job at Auburn Academy. She taught junior high home ec for several years in California, and after moving back to Washington, earned her master's degree in secondary education from the University of Washington. Taught at Highline Community College, then worked at the Federal Home Loan Bank of Seattle, and then several mortgage loan companies before retiring. Marilyn married Nolan Cramer on June 3, 1956, and moved to Loma Linda so he could attend medical school. Their first daughter, Sylvia, was born in January of 1961 in Spokane, Washington, where Dad was an intern. And their second daughter, Linda, was born in May 1962 in Loma Linda while he was taking an anesthesia residency. The family lived in Westminster, California for 6 years. Mom was active at home, in church, and all of our school activities. In 1970, Mom, Sylvia, and I moved to Kirkland to be near her parents and her sister. Mom joined the Bellevue Church and had been a member for almost 49 years. She was away the last 6.5 years, first in California, Redlands, California, and the last year near me in Yakima, but she never considered moving her membership. Bellevue was home. Though Sylvia and I are very different, Mom found ways to nurture both of us. She was attentive to our different interests, supported our growing skills and talents. She gave us freedom to make our own decisions, even if we made mistakes, and always encouraged us and was our biggest supporter as we grew from those mistakes and succeeded. She made most of our clothes when we were children, usually from the same pattern, but rarely from the same fabric. She encouraged us to choose our favorite colors, to be individuals. Mom taught us to sew as well, though we never had the same tailoring and fitting skills that she had. She fit and sewed my wedding dress. One of Mom's greatest adventures was an 8-week around-the-world trip to visit her parents at the Kendu Bay Hospital in Kenya, Africa, where her parents were serving as missionaries for 5 years. Our first stop was Copenhagen. Sylvia and I both remember the changing of the guard at the palace. In Kenya, we visited Nairobi, Lake Victoria, Kisii, many national parks, as well as people from different tribes. Luo and Maasai are 2 that I remember. Mom loved different cultures. One visit involved warm milk in some kind of an animal skin canteen that looked and smelled awful. She looked to her father, who gave her what she described as a take what they offer and we'll talk about it later look. So even though she was an adult, Grandpa gave her the look, and she drank it. One time we were driving through a game reserve and had car trouble, which again wasn't uncommon. Mom wasn't typically a worrier, but we had to camp, and she barely slept that night, fearful that we had inadvertently set up our tent in an elephant pathway. Mom was not easily intimidated. Before leaving home, she obtained an international driver's license so that she could drive in Africa. We actually have that license out on one of the tables in the back there. On the trip home, we stopped in India and explored New and Old Delhi, saw the Taj Mahal and its beautiful gardens in Agra. Mom looked for age-appropriate ways for Sylvia and I to enjoy these excursions as well, and Sylvia and I were able to sit on elephants and hand them bananas, which they took with their trunks. In the pictures, Sylvia is happy and engaged and enjoying the elephants, and I'm terrified and crying on top of the elephant. But Mom was always trying to encourage us, even scared little ones like me. Next stop was Bangkok with its riverboats and markets. We completed the tour with stopovers in Hong Kong and Hawaii. We traveled a little bit after we moved to Kirkland, but one trip both Sylvia and I remember was a trip to the Olympic National Park. We told her we didn't need to drive 4 hours to see a rainforest. We could see the rain from home. We weren't quite as adventuresome in those days. We also visited Mount Rainier National Park and Vancouver Island, exploring Victoria and Butchart Gardens. After we left home, Mom and her sister Sylvia traveled to Southeast Asia. They saw Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, and Jakarta. Mom loved visiting large capital cities, well-known museums and sites, as well as the small towns, the tea rooms, and the tiny shops. She relished local culture, and her sister was the perfect traveling companion. Mom and her sister Sylvia also traveled to the Yucatan Peninsula and into Belize. This was quite the adventure because they rented a car to take this trip. Again, nothing stopped Mom. They even broke down in the middle of nowhere and had to negotiate repairs on the side of the road. They drove from Cancun down to Chetumal into the top of Belize, drove west across the Yucatan Peninsula into Villahermosa, then up to Campeche and Merida. They visited ancient ruins in Tulum. Mom loved history, especially getting to see it firsthand. As her energy diminished, Mom found she could still explore new places on a cruise. Once aboard, she read, admired the scenery, enjoyed good food, fine dining, and took excursions off the ship as she had energy. Her first cruise was to Mexico with a friend. She cruised by herself, however, from San Diego through the Panama Canal to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, disembarked briefly, got back on, took the trip in the reverse order, visiting new ports, different ports along the way, a 28-day cruise in all. She loved it. Mom had many friends, but it was difficult to coordinate schedules, and she certainly never let the lack of a traveling companion keep her from an adventure. She also cruised up the Alaskan coast with friends from Yakima and had hoped to cruise the majestic fjords off Norway this summer. Mom was able to pair her love for travel and her desire for service in her retirement by going on several SAGE, Seniors in Action for God with Excellence, SAGE mission trips. She explored in India, Dominican Republic, Peru, Mozambique, and Mexico. After returning from Mozambique, she told me she couldn't go to Africa again. She just didn't have enough strength. But when she saw that Sage was going to Kenya this February, she longed to go one more time. While living in California, Mom visited 2 national parks with Sylvia and Giovanni, Zion and Death Valley. She loved both of those trips. She summered in Yakima during her California years and loved the fresh blueberries, cherries, and peaches. Each of the last 6 summers, Mom drove by herself between Redlands and Yakima, always independent, always adventurous, always capable. She stopped with friends and stayed in hotels all along the Oregon and California coasts. Last fall, Sylvia and I and Mom visited Lincoln City, Oregon for a belated 85th birthday celebration. The weather was beautiful. We walked on the beach, watched the sunsets, listened to the waves, all from our hotel room, explored art galleries, and enjoyed delicious food. This picture in the program is from that trip, where we were at an amazing restaurant overlooking the bay there at Lincoln City, enjoying a kind of formal, fancy dining experience that Mom loved. It was a wonderful trip, and we are so thankful for the memories. Mom loved gardening, and while she thoroughly enjoyed flowers, she also appreciated other aspects of plants: the color, the texture of the foliage, the fragrance, how it fit in or contrasted with the other things in her garden. She would have loved all of these flowers. The colors, the design, they're perfect. Mom and I both owned more than one copy of the Sunset Western Garden book, and I used mine to look up specific plants. I don't know how to prune one or something. Mom read the whole book. Who does that, right? It's a reference book. She read it. She carefully highlighted the plants that would grow in her growing zone, underlining the favorite features of each. Upon moving to California, she bought another copy and marked the plants in her new growing zone. She also arranged flowers and foliage for the Bellevue Church, often spending hours cutting and arranging it till it was just right, taking everything apart so she could fit it in her car, safely transport it, and do the final assembly here. A real labor of love. She could have just enjoyed the flowers at home, looking through her window, but she wanted others to enjoy the beauty, and she believed God's house should be beautiful on Sabbath. Mom loved the Northwest Flower and Garden Show, and she and I were able to go one last time this February. She purchased bulbs of White Eye's Double Oriental Lily, which is the flower I put on the front of the program. She had me do the digging and the planting, but she still chose the plants and designed her small garden in Yakima last summer. And I've got these in my yard now. Mom was always intrigued by color. She had her favorites, reds. She would love Allie's dress. Reds, greens, browns, but not just any red, green, or brown. She could see and appreciate things I never saw in colors. I just wrote some things down: hue, value, intensity, purity, tone. These things meant something to her. She could tell if it was a muddy color or if it was a clean color, if it was, the red had purple in it or orange. She could see all of that. She had her colors done as a young mother and then had them redone about 10 years ago. Her hair was white. She figured, things might have changed, and she wanted to know what her colors were. Mom carried her color fan in her purse and referred to it when selecting clothing, assuring that she chose the most flattering colors. She delighted in color as it related to her garden, fabrics, quilting, needlepoint, knitting, crocheting. One of the fabrics I chose from her collection that I have on display in one of the tables out there is the fabric is a combination of reds and oranges and greens and pinks and whites, all in one piece of fabric. And she bought that fabric specifically for a specific quilt pattern, where each block consists of 6 triangles cut out of the exact same piece. And depending on how you put them together, you could have 3 completely different looking quilt blocks. The quilt could be constructed with no repeated blocks. I don't think Mom had any intention of finishing this project. She frequently didn't finish projects. But she thoroughly enjoyed buying the fabric, cutting the fabric, turning it each different way, looking to see how the design would be best. Mom endured great losses in her long life. The loss of her marriage while in her 30s. Her younger brother, Richard, died from pancreatic cancer at only 39. Our cousins, his 2 children, Seb and Lacey, are here today to remember Mom with us. Her sister, Sylvia, they had planned to spend their retirements traveling together, battling uterine cancer at 50 and dying in Mom's home from breast cancer at 56. Richard was a physician, and Sylvia a nurse. And according to Mom, who never had any interest in healthcare, they were supposed to take care of Mother and Daddy. Instead, this responsibility fell to her. While working full-time and busy with church and school duties, she often drove to Puyallup after work on weekends during the last years of her parents' lives. Her own physical health took a hit during these difficult years. She didn't complain, just persevered. Despite being a single mother, Mom was always active at the school and at church. She was on the Kirkland School Board. She served as treasurer of the school and the academy. Was on the Conference Board of Education and the Union Committee. I used to accuse her of following me. I was on Kirkland, she was on the Kirkland School Board. I was in the academy, she was on the Conference Board. I was at Walla Walla, she was on the Union Board. But she was just interested. She wanted to know how these things run. She wanted to be able to offer suggestions for improving them. She volunteered helping students read. She served the church as an elder, Sabbath school teacher, head deaconess, floral committee member, church and grounds cleanup days volunteer. And many of you enjoyed delicious salads in her apple-shaped wooden salad bowl. I asked her during her last week of life what kept her in church when so many fall away. Her answer was completely not what I was expecting. But she said, quote, "Daddy had been an Adventist since my freshman year in college, and I had seen him work as head elder and chair of the building committee. Mother was treasurer for years and also home missionary secretary. I never thought you could run church by putting your Sabbath dress on. Church requires effort," end quote. Mom didn't expect the church to do something for her. She worked willingly to make church a place where people came to know Jesus and grew in that relationship and with people. Mom never lost her love for learning or for teaching. She read continually, seemingly never without a book, a magazine, or a newspaper in her hand. It was an unusual day when she didn't complete this crossword and the Sudoku puzzles. She read about history, travel, quilting arts, design, gardening. She read the Bible, and she loved last quarter's Sabbath school lesson on Revelation. Nothing was too deep for her to comprehend. She just seemed to, the harder the study, the more interested she was in it. She always had something to contribute to a discussion. And sometimes it seemed to me like she was making things up. I thought there was no way she could remember such specific information on so many topics. But if I ever looked it up, she was right. Her mind was filled with facts and details many of us never learned, much less remember. Mom was a faithful friend. She hoped to go to the 100th anniversary of Auburn Academy held last weekend. Her 70th reunion would be in 2 years, but she liked to go a year or two on either side to see her friends in those classes as well. Some of you were Mom's friends for only a short while, but many for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. 2 of her Academy classmates have been communicating with me, friends for 70 years. She had well-educated and uneducated friends. Many of her friends were Adventists, some were not. Black, white. Mom had a difficult experience facing prejudice while living on the Army base in San Antonio at age 10, and she determined never to let that evil be a part of her life. Mom was often a friend to the friendless. Mom was blessed with 3 grandchildren. Alessandra, her oldest, a physician assistant in dermatology, lives in Newport Beach, California. Some of Alessandra's favorite memories of Grandma include blackberry picking and jam making, especially blackberries on this side of the state. There's just something about West Side blackberries that are amazing. Getting her colors done with Grandma. Ellie says it brought an air of art to my daily life. A trip to Vancouver to have high tea at the Empress Hotel. Grandma's love of Christmas traditions. Maybe that stemmed from having a brother and sister both born on Christmas. Christmas was always a happy day in their house with the Christmas celebration in the morning, usually 2 chocolate cakes in the evening, one for Sylvia and one for Richard. My grandma always made them each their own cake. Alessandra also remembers Mom's love of traditions, history, and bird watching. Grandma told Alessandra, you can either bake pie crust or bread. She told Sylvia and I that when we were kids too. I was a pie crust baker and Sylvia was a bread baker at the time, but Allie's a pie crust. And she also remembers Grandma's favorite was chocolate pecan pie. And she especially cherished the spiritual connection they shared. This part of their relationship was actively growing near the end of Grandma's life. Jenny, always Jennifer to Grandma, a physical therapist and outpatient neuro rehab, and her husband David Moore live in Loma Linda. They are expecting our first grandchild in July. Grandma picked out a very soft, stuffed dog as a gift for her first great-grandchild when she was visiting Sylvia in February. Jenny and Grandma shared a love for ice cream, reading good books, gardening, and eating very dark chocolate. Jeff, a mechanical engineer working in the aerospace industry, and his wife Brittany live in Snohomish. They are expecting our second grandchild in September. Jeff remembers Grandma planned special activities that he would enjoy, watching fireworks on the 4th of July and a tour of Boeing, are 2 that he recalls. Somehow she knew that even when he was a kid, that he was going to be an engineer. None of us knew what an engineer really was. He appreciated her asking questions about his job and trying to understand what engineers really do. Mom was never that into babies. Sylvia and I wondered what she did with us when we were babies. But as the grandchildren grew, she loved all the time she could spend with them, watching them learn to read, attending their baptisms, graduations, lots of graduations, weddings, birthdays, holidays. Mom took each of the grandchildren up the Space Needle on their 10th birthday for what she called Seattle Fog, a dish of ice cream and chocolate sauce with dry ice and water in another bowl that made it look like fog was rolling across the table. She loved to hear about their projects, their classes, their relationships, their jobs, their interests, their books. It didn't have to be a special occasion. Grandma loved spending time and talking with her grandchildren. She was so proud of all 3. Jeff and Brittany came to visit Grandma that last Sabbath, April 20. Once I told Mom they were on their way, she responded, "Oh dear, that's such a lot of bother for them." Immediately followed by, "I'd better rest because I do want to visit with Jeff." They arrived about 8 p.m., and Mom was able to visit with all of us for about a half an hour. Mom took her last breath about 4.5 hours later, and Sylvia and I are so grateful that God provided miraculously for both of us to be with Mom for those last 2 weeks. We were honored to care for her and thankful she wasn't alone. We wanted more time, and we miss her incredibly, but are thankful she's resting in Jesus, and we look with great hope to the second coming of Jesus. We will see Mom again soon. She's going to be strong and healthy, and we will never be separated again. Mom could say with Paul in 2 Timothy 1:12, "For I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep what I have committed to him until that day." About 6 o'clock that Sabbath evening, as Jeff was driving to our home, Mom said to me, "I won't be here to see the great-grandchildren, But I want you to tell the grandchildren that I am trusting their parenting so that I can meet my great-grandchildren in heaven. What a challenge to her grandchildren. What hope, what confidence in God's salvation. I know she would like to include each one of us in that challenge to spend time each day with Jesus, read his word, talk to him, choose to follow him, be ready when he comes, and spend all eternity with Jesus. She will look for me and for you in heaven on that day too.
The timeless theme, earth and heaven will pass away. It's not a dream, God will make all things new that day. Gone is the curse from which I stumbled and fell. Evil is vanished to eternal hell. No more night, no more pain, no more tears, never crying again. Praises to the great I am. We will live in the light of the risen Lamb. See all around, now the nations bow down to sing. The only sound is the praises to Christ our King. Slowly the names from the book are read. I know the King, so there's no need
Thank you so much. Wonderful song. At this point, I have the privilege of sharing a tribute which has been written by Marilyn's son-in-law, Giovanni. Here is what Giovanni says. He says, in Psalm 23, David wrote, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." These are words of reassurance and consolation for each one of us experiencing today a deep and unfilled void left by the passing of Marilyn Cramer. However, we are told that the loss of our mother, our friend, our sister in Christ is a temporary one. We have been promised resurrection to and participation in eternal life. Today, in the celebration of her life, we renew our claim to that promise. Marilyn Cramer had a deeply rooted spiritual strength that guided her throughout a long life. Her unshakable faith was never found wanting. Through trials, difficulties, and unimaginable losses, she remained firm and relied on God's love for support and guidance. She faced adversities with courageous resolve. She never surrendered when it would have been an easy choice. In spite of many challenges, she remained poised in the stoic acceptance of life's trials. Mother was a loving daughter. Till her very last days on earth, she articulated a deep affection for her parents. She talked of her happy upbringing, of the education that was imparted to her, and that precious parental presence until well into adult life. In honoring her parents, she obeyed the only command that contains a promise. Mother was a caring sister. Even though she lost her younger siblings early, their memory remained vivid in her heart forever. The deep pain was somehow mitigated by the many fraternal moments that had been shared through the earlier years. As a mother, Marilyn inculcated into her daughters the love of God and the importance of integrity of character. And she prepared them to be loving wives and excellent mothers. She was proud of this accomplishment because she achieved a complete success in both. As a grandmother, Marilyn was patient and kind. She adored her grandchildren and never missed an opportunity to nurture a deep relationship with each one. Her advices were dictated by the strong love she had for them. She was a proud grandmother and was rewarded with a reciprocated, genuine love by her grandchildren. As a friend, Marilyn had a long list of friendships that remained deeply connected for decades. Supportive, available, and always present, she offered her companionship without reservation. She never missed the opportunity to visit with one of her friends, and was very proud of each one. As a woman, Marilyn was blessed with a rare beauty and a superior intelligence, sharp, brilliant, and a fascinating dialoguer. She had a vast knowledge and an innate curiosity that was continuously satisfied by the most sophisticated reading. That knowledge was often shared eloquently and enthusiastically. She conveyed a contagious passion for her discoveries. Her sound advices could seldom be challenged. Her vast knowledge in a variety of fields assured the validity of her counsels. Marilyn Cramer was an avid traveler. eager to discover new lands and new places, meet new people. She knew how to find historic treasures, virtually unmentioned by travel writings and experts. Upon her return, she would research and study about them in depth and delighted her audience with newfound knowledge and stimulating experiences. Because of all these things, Marilyn Cramer will be missed by each one of us. My name is Giovanni. I am Sylvia's husband. I had the honor and the privilege to have Marilyn Cramer as a mother-in-law for almost 34 years. A painful physical condition has prevented me from attending this special event. The absence is even more painful. This is my humble contribution in honor of Marilyn Cramer. And now this is me talking. I was an admirer of Marilyn's as well. Maybe one of my greatest admirations is that this memorial service did not happen a decade and a half ago. 15 years ago, I visited her in the hospital and prayed for her before her major heart surgery. And even she was bracing herself for the possibility that she would not emerge from that operation. But she did, and grew stronger and stronger, and she soon became, to my perception, an even more vigorous reincarnation of herself than she had been before. In a few minutes, you will have an opportunity to share what Marilyn meant to you, but here are just a few things which made Marilyn memorable to me. Who can forget those peaches? Peaches once a year, just as those wonderful fruits matured, Marilyn took orders, and Sharley and I delighted in receiving a box or half a box, whatever she could personally drive over from across the mountains. Let me see the hands of those of you who have bitten into peaches personally transported by Marilyn. Look at that. She's going to be the peach lady in heaven, it is possible. There out on those meadows up there in those orchards. Almost as soon as Shelley and I arrived here at Bellevue, we watched as Marilyn took part in a Sabbath morning feature, which I think she herself initiated. She always had a deep love for the youth of our church. And during the feature time before the classes began, she would present little talks in the sanctuary right here. And she would introduce and focus her comments on the young people, like the teens, individually and by name. And every time as she spoke, there was a catch in her voice and a tear in her eye. And Marilyn's interest in children and young people went well beyond those who came to this church building. For years, she would serve, as Linda has mentioned, at various times as our Adventist Schools business manager, board member, staunch supporter of faculty and administration. She would sometimes email me or talk to me in person about a staff member who seemed to be going through a difficult time and could use a little encouragement from one of the pastors. Many times she would ask to speak to me in my office. As we set up an appointment, I knew that the subject would probably be the school and what could be done to ameliorate this or that issue which might have come up. And I quickly learned that her purpose in these discussions was never to ask me to generate ideas about solutions. I never saw Marilyn helpless and at a loss for solutions. No, with her powerful analytical mind, which she applied systematically and thoroughly to even the most daunting challenge, she would have already come up with possible solutions, which she wanted to run by me. And if I thoughtfully mused aloud about a suggestion which she hadn't mentioned yet, I would rapidly discover that she had already thought about that possibility. And she would gently and graciously tell me about some serious problems with that idea. She also always did this so kindly and diplomatically that my first feeling was how genuinely lucky we all were that it was she who was doing the thinking and not me. Since this is Mother's Day weekend, I preached a sermon this morning on 3 Bible women, Mary, Jesus' mother, and Timothy's grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice. My point was that the Bible makes very clear that each of these women had staggeringly powerful faith. After one humble logistics question, Mary meekly and joyfully accepted her role as the mother of Jesus. And Paul, speaking of Lois's and Eunice's faith, called it a sincere faith, which in the Greek is literally an unhypocritical faith, and said that this faith had been successfully passed down to Timothy. And to my mind, Marilyn was another mother who had a powerful faith and who did her level best in whatever way possible to inspire that faith in those who peopled the arenas through which she moved. Faith comes by hearing the Word of God, says Paul. Marilyn knew her Bible and knew very well those of its particular verses which can seem overfamiliar and even vaguely academic until they are read aloud on a day like today. So let's read those verses again, and let's remember that Marilyn knew them and knew their author and longed for their fulfillment and craved a reunion with you all when they come true. 1 Thessalonians 4. But I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words. 1 Corinthians 15, behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. And this final passage might just be the most motherly passage in the entire Bible. As I read about the great reunion God and Marilyn have been longing for, listen and you'll hear the loving throb of his great parental heart. Revelation 21, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven. The Greek word is megaphone. I heard a megaphone speaking out of heaven, saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things new. Amen. At this time, it's your chance to tell us into a microphone what Marilyn meant to you. We have Greg with the mic there, a cordless mic. So if you would like to tell us what effect Marilyn had on your life, you can raise your hand as Kim has done. And by the way, before you, this service is being live streamed, and I don't think the camera is going to tip in all directions. So before you speak, if you could just tell us who you are and then tell us what you remember.
I'll be brave and go first. My name is Kim Nye, here with my husband John, and I just wanted to share how special Marilyn was to our family. We came here as a young couple. I was pregnant with Olivia, our first child, and so we met Marilyn when we joined our membership here. And Marilyn was just the best kind of person. She was always kind and so supportive to both of us as we raised our kids here in this church. She always took the time to greet us, always talked to our kids, asked them how they were, showed genuine sincerity in how they were doing. And I cherish all the conversations that I had with Marilyn. I wish I could have had a real pearl for every pearl of wisdom she would share with me. She did know so much about so many things. And Linda, your life sketch was wonderful. I enjoyed learning more things about her. Two quick favorite memories of Marilyn. One year when Andrew, our son, was I think about 5 or 6, she had planned a Christmas program for different cultures around the world. And a lot of children were involved. There were costumes. It was really wonderful. And she asked Andrew to be the little drummer boy. Oh. And he fit the role perfect. He had lots of blonde curls, and she found the cutest outfit for him to wear. And he was so honored to be the drummer boy that Sabbath. My favorite memory of Marilyn regarding our daughter was in the 4th grade, Mrs. Howson had everyone do a plant project, and they had to make a notebook of all the plants and flowers that they could take pictures of, and they had to write notes about them, and it was quite involved. So we're thinking, where could we go to take pictures of all these flowers and stuff? And Marilyn's name popped into our heads, and so we contacted her, and she was so excited. So one afternoon, I brought Olivia over, and we spent quite a while there, and she took us all around her yard and the neighborhood, and there was so much information. Olivia had all she needed for the whole notebook. And we still have that in our coffee table drawer at home. So those are my 2 favorite memories of her circling around our kids. But we just adored your mom. She was an amazing person, and I look forward to seeing her again.
Thank you, Kim. Who's next? A memory of what Marilyn meant to you. There's almost 180 degrees of people, so wave your hand vigorously and we'll finally catch up.
I'm going to sit down while I talk, but this is Carol Grady. Marilyn and I were quilting buddies, and she and Rita and I used to go to all the quilting shows and admire all the beautiful quilts. And some of them I made later, but I'm not sure whether Marilyn ever got any made. But she loved to buy fabric, and she also showed me where the best quilt shop in this area is downtown in Bellevue. Anyway, we also talked books a lot, and I read several of the ones she recommended, and I think she read some of the ones I recommended, so that was another bond. But I actually have a very much earlier bond to Marilyn because I started nurses training at Loma Linda. I dropped out after a year and got married. But anyway, in my class was Sylvia, her sister. So when I came here and found out that she was a Sturtevant, I found out that I knew her sister. So I'm going to really miss Marilyn, and I think my biggest regret is that I kept putting off writing a letter to her this last year, and I will always be sorry about that.
Thank you, Carol. Who's next for the microphone? Yes, a hand, Robert, I think, back there.
One of the things I valued about Marilyn a great deal was she had a firm belief that excellence in education and Adventist education were not mutually exclusive terms. And she was consistent in her pursuit of that, and that's definitely appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, here's another hand over here. Cheryl has a memory, former compatriot of Marilyn's. Oh,
okay. This is Jim Learned, and I understand that Marilyn always had a very active, creative imagination. I remember her telling us that when she was in elementary school, she spun a really fantastic tale to her parents about, I don't know about what, but anyhow, they asked her, now, is that real, or is that just a story? She said, well, it's a real story.
I'm Cheryl Learned, and Marilyn loved beautiful objects, elegant occasions, and chocolate. And for beautiful objects, you know, it's already been mentioned how she loved flowers. Well, one year, she and Marlene Fritz were on the floral committee here at the church, and Mother Nature blessed us with peonies in my yard just at the perfect time for them to use them for a bouquet for church. And so I said, well, would you like some peonies? And, oh, yes, they would. So I said, well, come and pick them. And so they did. And I knew they would make a beautiful bouquet. Well, when I got to church the next morning, they said, well, do you like it? Well, I didn't know because I hadn't seen it yet. And so I walked in and I peeked in here, and it wasn't just beautiful, it was gorgeous and humongous. It must have been 4 or 5 feet across and at least 3 feet high. The pink peonies were augmented with lavender clusters of rhododendron blossoms. It was eye candy for sure. It was just gorgeous. And I know a lot of other people really appreciated it because it was so big. They had it sitting on the floor. And after church, there were several parents that had their children go up and sit and take pictures of it. So it was very much enjoyed. Then for elegant occasions, Marilyn didn't want to miss watching the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. So she and some friends, including myself, got together and stayed up all night watching it and thoroughly enjoying it. And then we had a very fancy English breakfast in the morning, and Marilyn had brought chocolate tea.
Chocolate tea. Can I slip in my Marilyn? This also involves Marlene Fritz and Marilyn Cramer, both lovers of flowers. It was so fun to see the different arrangements individually they would come up with. I can draw. See, they love flowers, but they have different approaches, at least to my perception. Marilyn's often were a thin vase or vase, a spire of a flower, a spire of a plant of some kind, a spire, so thin and sparse. Marlene's look like this, the Victorian style. This would be a Marlene style, I think. I don't think I see what I'd perceive as a Marilyn style. But it's so different. Those ladies loved nature so much, and yet they had their individual approaches to it, to my perception. Okay, and now I see that here's Ruth. Okay, Ruth.
Yes, I'm Ruth Christensen. And actually, I knew her mother closely before I knew her.
Oh my.
And since her mother was one of the members of the group of people that were sending missionaries overseas because they were from part of the Loma Linda physicians groups. And she was just a wonderful woman. I thought of her as the epitome, along with Mildred Jensen, as a mother away from home, because my mother lived in Florida. And I thought she was the most perfect woman there was. And to have a couple of women here in this area was a great gift to me because I really appreciated her. about 24 years ago when someone held a nice party for me when I was marrying Glenn Henriksen. Marilyn knew what I would like. She gave me a tree.
A tree?
A tree, and it's in my yard. It's still there.
Still growing.
And it's going to keep growing as long as I stay there, because that's where I'm going to stay indefinitely. So this, and we had so much in common. We found that many of the things that I loved were the things that she loved. And so we had a great deal of time whenever we got together, even though we didn't live near each other. Actually, I never was in her home. But she had been in my home on occasion because she was more apt to get around than to different places than I was at those times in my life. Mm-hmm. So she was a great person for me. And just in case you don't know, you know who I'm Eric's mom. And so I am will miss her very much. Because when she came up here, she usually came and saw me too.
Oh, neat. Thank you, Ruth, for sharing. Oh, here comes Bob's going to tell us about.
I don't know how much I can speak this afternoon because of allergies. But if you'll put up with this, I want to tell you a little bit about Marilyn. Now, Marilyn loved to go on Sage trips, and I'm the leader of Sage. We went to Mozambique, and there she was very much involved with the program there, designing different things, and oftentimes we put her on to landscaping when we had a landscaping project. One of the pastors there in that area had been shot in the war that they had over there, and a few years beforehand, and he'd been riding on the back of a motorbike, and somebody took a shot at him and hit him in an ankle, and he had to walk to his district, which included about 3 different churches over about 15 miles. And he did this on a weekly basis at great pain. She was a part of the group that provided for him, before we left there, a brand new motorbike. And he was the most excited guy you've ever seen in your whole life. But that was a part of Maryland. Then we were in Mexico at one time, and this was later on, and she was having heart problems, and we had to take her out of the mountains where we were living and put her in a hotel down below there and pick her up every day to take her to the project site. But the story that I wanted to tell you is about in the Dominican Republic. We had been there the year before and got acquainted with this fellow and his wife who owned a nursery. And they said they were just the most vibrant, vivacious people, and they would just love to talk, and especially this guy. And he was telling all about how he was going to give this property on his nursery property there for a brand new church. Mm. And I mean, he was enthusiastic, and it was all recorded on tape. We came back the following year to near the same location. We were building another church. Marilyn was in charge of the landscaping. And during that week, on the Sabbath, prior to finishing our project, we had an opportunity to go over, at least a couple of us folks went over to this place, this nursery, because we had now heard that there was a brand new church on that property. When we got there, we found out there was a beautiful church, but it was empty and all locked up and was not being used. We found out later on the reason for this was that the first Sabbath they opened it up, somebody got in there, the children got out there and started walking over all of his plants that he had in the nursery. And so he said, until we get a new fence around this place that had been promised to us, we're not going to put this church is not going to open. Well, Fanny Ulch, those of you who know Fanny, and Marilyn were two of a kind. I mean, the most outgoing people you can imagine. Mm-hmm. So we had to buy nursery supplies. And before we had left that first Sabbath, the fellow was not there. The man and his wife were not there, but there were a couple of other members of the church that were sitting out on his porch. And we went up to them and found out about all that was happening, that the church was not open and all. And Fanny was so upset about this that she said, I want to have a prayer. And in that prayer, she said, God is looking down with a frown upon his face because of this situation. Mm-hmm. Well, during the following week, Marilyn thought, we've got to find nursery supplies, and they had looked at different nurseries, but they couldn't find what they wanted, and they knew that this fellow had it. And Marilyn said, I don't want to go back there. She was afraid to go back after that prayer. It's the first time I've ever seen Marilyn afraid of anything. But she was, kind of the person that just wasn't going to walk in on this kind of a situation. But they had to go. And when they got there, they found out that this fellow had come home with his wife a few days beforehand. And as he was walking through his nursery one day, a stranger was there. And he was off a little distance, sitting on a bench. I thought, this is strange. So he went over and started walking towards him, and the guy got up and started walking away. And he couldn't catch up with him. He finally disappeared someplace, but before he disappeared, he looked back with a frown upon his face and disappeared.
Oh.
And when this fellow got that story from what had been prayed the week beforehand, you can just believe that the church was open the next Sabbath and from then on. But it was one of those stories that Marilyn was a part of, and she was a part of a few others too. But she was a great sport having her on these sage trips. And we'll never forget some of the worship she had with us as well. But anyway, I just thought you might be interested in seeing how God works on these mission trips and how Marilyn got herself involved as well.
And she would come back glowing from those trips with the highest opinion of Sage, just another little skill or little experience she'd had added to her. And we have another hand up.
I'm Lisa Sloop, and my favorite memory of Marilyn is when Greg and I got married. She didn't know me at all, and I was really touched that her gift to us was actually for Greg. It was a drill. And I just thought that her thoughtfulness towards the man, when so much of what you're given at a wedding is for the women, was very touching. And it's something that I've watched in her as she's taken an interest in the things that Jeff has enjoyed through the years and those types of things. So.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yes, here's one in the front row. Oops. Boy, they're fighting for the mic. Dwayne?
I'm Dwayne Childs, and I'd like to share with you the day I met Marilyn. I was teaching at Auburn Adventist Academy. This probably was in the spring of 1974. I was teaching art. The principal had asked me to develop a fine arts department and get as many students into it as possible. So I had about 75 students in 3 sections of art, and as well as teaching 3 sections of freshman English. Well, the Board of Education was meeting on the Auburn campus this particular day, and all of the faculty were asked to go to lunch at the cafeteria and mingle with the Board of Education members. So I was at the cafeteria, sat down to enjoy my meal, and who was across the table from me but Marilyn Cramer. Now, I had no knowledge of Marilyn Cramer whatsoever, but she, of course, asked what I taught, and I told her, and boy, did she get into this art department business. She wanted to know every little detail about what I was doing and what the students were doing and how they were doing it, and was I teaching this and was I doing that? And we had a really wonderful conversation. Well, afterwards, even during it, I said to myself, here is a woman who is a lady, and she knows what time of day it is. And then I said, and I think she's someone to be reckoned with. And as I got to know her in the future, more and more, and then came to Bellevue to church, and she was a member here, I really got to know and love her and respect her as a really wonderful friend, and she will be missed.
Amen. Okay, this young lady here needs the microphone. Don't be distracted, Greg. Just bring it up to her. Thank you.
I'm Alessandra. I'm Marilyn's first granddaughter, and I wanted to share two things about my grandma. I really love that I'm hearing all about how my grandma invested in all of you guys, and I feel very much the same way. Once she found out that she had two grandchildren that were left-handed, she happened to come upon a store that was called Southpaw, and she had a journal that she gave me that opened, instead of this way, it opened this way. And I'm like, of course, she'd be the only one that would find something like that. So that's something that I really valued about her, was she would just give you something that was ever so specific to you. And Jeff, her third grandchild, is also left-handed, and I believe that she gave you some left-handed knives and scissors. She asked me if I wanted the scissors. I told her I had already acclimated to the right-handed scissors. And then my second story is, my grandma did not really like medicine until later in life, where I feel like she was just dramatically used by God in the medical world. When was this? I think it was 2014. Her health was in really bad shape, and Loma Linda had wanted to do a heart valve replacement in a new way that they had only done on 2 other people. And so my grandma was the third person that they did this procedure on, and she was the only one that didn't have to have an extended stay in the hospital, and she was the one that recovered the quickest. So as much as she didn't love medicine, she contributed to medicine by allowing God to work through her in that way. So that was really special for me to remember about her.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Now let's take a thoughtful gaze at the clock. The thoughtful gaze at the clock tells me it's been about 1 hour and 15. Now, if you want to share more, raise your hand and you can share more. If you were saying to yourself, should I? You could also share across the table up at the meal there. But I would like, personally, to hear some more stories about Marilyn here, if you have them. Yes, Nona in the back. And, Greg's got his eyes looking for the, oh, here's Jim.
I'm Jim Burtt, and I belong to Marion Burtt. We have an old farmhouse on Mercer Island, and I was a professional driver. Merle over there is a hot driver, and I always wondered about Marilyn, because she'd show up day and night, big smile on her face. And I thought about, after that session with the heart in California, and she'd drive from there up here, and I thought, I did it once, and I was scared spitless. I mean, the 18-wheelers were thick, and people were in and out, and it was 80 miles an hour, and I thought, here's Marilyn with a big smile, going along like the wind. So I don't know how the family feels about her driving. It's, that's always in the back. Didn't batter much, but you didn't like to ride with her probably. I don't know. So anyway, but she was a pleasure whenever she showed up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, let's see now. Was there another hand that I saw?
No.
Nona, yes, Nona, way at the back.
Marilyn was a very special lady, and Linda, I loved your memories of her because you captured her to a T. I loved visiting with Marilyn. She was so expansive and far-reaching in her interests, and I thoroughly was impressed and enraptured by her dedication for Christian education and her dedication to the Kirkland School, PSAA school, and on the school boards and on the conference committees. And Christian education was so important to her, and she let anybody and everybody know the importance of that. I also very much enjoyed her love for different things. And Maylan, your description of the flower decorating between Marlene and Marilyn just tickled my heart because they were such good friends, so different, and they put up with each other. And they had a wonderful time on their travels and sojourns and going here and going there. And Marilyn was the epitome of accepting people with differences or that weren't just cookie cutter of her. And it was a wonderful treat. And I'll miss her immensely.
Won't be long, though, will it? Won't be long. Anybody else? Let's see another couple of hands here. Oh, yeah, here's Marlene. Now we're going to hear from the lush Victorian floral lady. So give us the balancing view of aesthetics here.
I said I wasn't going to speak because I was not going to be able to.
Bring that mic a little closer.
Oh, I wasn't going to speak, but they get after me at the home all the time about talking too loudly, but everybody's deaf. So no. Anyway, I live in assisted living. I'm much too young to be there, but anyway. Marilyn, when Nona was saying difference, I mean like Marilyn and I were Mutt and Jeff. She was the lady. Anyway, and I was an interesting, anyway, I will not describe myself. Sidekick?
Sidekick.
Well, anyway, call me what you want to call me. But anyway, I just, instead of a sympathy card, I got both of her daughters thank you cards or friendship cards, thanking the families. All of them, grandchildren and all, for giving me the experience and the privilege of their mother having such a different child, or whatever. Anyway, I'm almost ready to be through.
This is the Victorian way of the conversation here. It's not to the point so much as it is expansive.
I love the way you were twiddling your fingers because that's Marilyn and that's Marlene. But we had, I tell you, some of the times of our lives. But one of the things that we did that was just outstanding, and that is to go to Vancouver Island to the resort Wickaninnish. Have any of you kids, moms, husbands, take your wives to Wickaninnish if you have $500 million. But Marilyn said to me, Marlene, I really want to go to Wickaninnish, and if you'll drive, I'll pay. Whoa, what a bouquet. How do you like that, Maylan? A bouquet. And after we'd been there for 3 days, she said, I'd like to stay for 2 more days. It was so absolutely outstanding. Okay, I bet you didn't think I was going to be able to quit. She was such a blessing to me, such a gift. I mean, she's a reader, and I am more like come Dick, come Jane. So I would go to bed, we would travel, I would go to bed, fall asleep, and Marilyn would read half the night about everything we were going to do the next day. Wasn't that just a gift? I mean, wow. Thank you for putting up with me.
Thank you, Marlene.
Oh, I'm Marlene Fritz.
Marlene Fritz, yes.
I don't know if I had to introduce myself because I'm such a motor mouth.
Thank you so much. Anybody else want to try to top that? Oh, hey, here's a hand. A hand. Oh, okay. There's lights dazzling my eyes. I can't always see where things are. Dwayne, you going to do a rebuttal, or what are you going to do?
I'm Dwayne Childs again, and I want to share something that I don't know if this is true or not, but I surely think it might be. Once upon a time when we had 2 daughters in college and 1 at Auburn Academy, and we're out of money, and completely out of money because I didn't have a job, I wrote a check to Walla Walla College for, I think a little over $100 for money that I did not have in the bank, and was praying, please God, cover this money. Because if I didn't have it there by a certain date, one of my daughters would have to de-enroll from school. So anyway, we came to church. I probably mailed the check on Thursday or so, planned that it would be there by Monday morning so my daughter wouldn't have to leave school. And here on that little desk out here was an envelope that said Dwayne Childs on the outside. So I picked it up and opened it up and looked inside, and there was cash to the right amount of the check that I had mailed.
Wow. And
we pondered and wondered, now where could that have come from? We hadn't told anyone, but we always suspected that it was Marilyn. And I never, ever had the courage or the heart to say, Marilyn, did you once upon a time put some money in an envelope with my name on it when we were in desperate need? So someday in heaven, I'm going to get up the courage to ask her.
Yeah. Shelley, did you indeed have your hand up? You got one finger up over there, so thank you. Thank you. This is Shelley, my wife, for those of you who don't know that.
I'm Shelley Schurch, and Jim, I'm glad you said what you did because it reminded me of a car trip with Marilyn that I think she regretted taking. It was early in our time here. It was during the era when we had car rallies.
Oh, no, that was
couple
she in the
summers
car?
in a row. And Marilyn bravely got in the pastor's car for this one car rally. I can't remember who all was in our car.
Gail Woodruff was in there, one of them, because she was the one that
Yes.
kept arguing with me about things.
That's another story for another time, I think.
Yeah.
But Marilyn, that's when I realized how she could speak tactfully but clearly. And she mentioned to Maylan how she had read recently how there was increased patrol over the speed limit in this very area that we were going through. But I have to say that when we heard Easter morning that Marilyn had died, I just had to sit a while. I just had to sit with the news. And I just protested in my mind because I thought, but I was going to have another conversation with her. My last conversation with her was not going to be my last conversation. And I realized as we've all talked, that's what Marilyn did. She had conversations. They were with you. She wasn't looking around to catch anybody else's eye. She was focused on you. She cared about you no matter what you were like. I'm not elegant. She was. She was classy. She didn't care if I wasn't. She just had such a capacity for friendship and for caring. I told the administrative officers at the conference office where I work in education that she had died. And they were just shocked. I think we all thought she would keep going, even though we knew her health was frail. And they sat back and they started reminiscing. They can remember specific things she said during committee meetings, when she also would speak clearly and give good advice. And the treasurer asked me to find out from the family what would be a good, where they would like a contribution to go in her honor, because they think so highly of what she has done, especially for education. And that's something I still have to ask because they want to do it. I think we all just want to honor Marilyn's memory. And you know, she always did things so thoughtfully. It was as if when I was sitting there that morning, I thought, well, it is Easter. The Lord's reminding me that the trumpet will sound and we will see her again.
That's right. You know, let's look at the clock again. It's like 25 to, has that been changed from daylight saving time? So it's 4:30, it's 4:36. If there's one more, the person that has to share, you can always share across the table upstairs, and or even better yet, well, not better yet, but at least email or something, or text, do yourself a selfie, how do they say it nowadays, talking about it. Make sure you share the memories. If you have a memory of parents, just save it for the family and share it with her. I don't see any other hand. I don't see people leaping to their feet with sobs of imploring sobs. So I don't. So let's now go now to Rick in his dramatic conclusion, followed by George's prayer. I'd like to thank Carolyn Howson, by the way, for playing our piano, postlude, prelude. Thank you to all the musicians.
Could you bow your heads, please, for a benediction? Dear God, thank you so much for the good memories of Marilyn. Memories of a good mother. Memories of a disciple of yours. Memories of a real friend. Memories of a strong and proactive supporter of Seventh-day Adventist Christian education. Memories of Marilyn placing her life in your hands prior to her heart valve surgery. Memories of great conversations, some as light and airy as a puffy cloud, and some as deep as the ocean. Other memories that you may be thinking about right now. We look forward to seeing and visiting with Marilyn at your second coming. We thank you in your name.
Lord.